I'm Arthur Torrington of Windrush Foundation, and this bit is sponsored by the Lottery Fund. And today I'm welcoming Ansel Wong.
Hi.
How are you doing, Ansel?
Thank you very much indeed. I'm indeed honoured to be here with you.
It's a pleasure. Now, I want you to go back a bit to Trinidad, because that's where you're from. Just to say a little bit about that history.
Well, as you indicated, I was born in Trinidad and Tobago, and therefore grew up there in terms of my understanding and culture and so on. And there were quite a lot of important influences that organized my life and prepared me for life here in the United Kingdom. I mean, as a young person, obviously you went to school and you acquired your knowledge and understanding of your background and your health. But for me, one of the major influences in my life was Dr. Eric Williams, because at that time his scholarship, his engagement with us was very important, because he opened doors and opened understanding of our history and background. So when I left Trinidad, one of the things that remained in my mind and my knowledge and understanding was his whole concept of Massa de Don. And that was quite an important lesson for me, because I remember it quite distinctively, going to his lectures, going to his meetings, and understanding and engaging. Because around that time, the politicians were very, very vocal. The beauty was the oratory of the politicians, because they used to have hustings around the towns and the villages. And if you can't speak to the people, speak to them in an oratorial style to get them involved, there was one politician who was known as having a silver tongue, because he was able to speak in such a way, because we understood that language, we understood the opportunity to acquire knowledge. And Eric Williams gave me that incentive to learn, to research, and to bring knowledge and information together.
Very good. Now, Ansel, your surname is Wong. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, my father comes from China. He's from Guangdong in China, and for some reason he migrated out, like most Chinese, after the Boxer Rebellion in China. They came to the Caribbean, and he came to Trinidad and Tobago and stayed there and met with my mother, who is a mixture of African and Carib and European. And they had a relationship, and we came out of that relationship. But it was a very interesting dynamic of having a Chinese community, exclusively Chinese community, and basically a local native community coming together. And there was that inherent tensions between those two. So my father, being a Chinese, was determined that his boy child, his first boy child, was going to return to China. That's me. Fortunately or unfortunately, he died before that happened, because there's an understanding that you should take your boy child, who carries the line, the bloodline, back to the country of birth. So I grew up in that kind of household, but significantly after he died, my mother remarried an Indian man. So I grew up in the substantive part of my life
very
in an
multicultural
Indian household. Hindu household. So it was that's very typical of people from Trinidad and Tobago, to be able to straddle those cultural elements. So within one family, there would be several strands of culture, ethnicity, and so on. And that was my character, and that was my family background. Yeah.
So you came to this country as a young man then, and you were at Hull University?
Yes, I mean, the pathway for many of us who went to school was either to come to England to go to university, or failing that, would go to USA and Canada, mostly if you get the Canadian scholarships. But the priority was a British university, an English university. So I applied to a number of universities, and I got into Hull in Yorkshire to read English and American studies. So I left there in 1965, came to Hull and entered university there. Interestingly, it was an interesting university because it had links. It was one of the few universities that had links in relation to Caribbean literature, because they had a professor there who was an expert in Caribbean literature. And that university also had other fellow Trinidadians who were fairly notable. For example, in my time, Professor Tony Martin, who is the Marcus Garvey Scholar,
Indeed.
as you know, he was there with us. And then Dr. Colin Prescott, who is also a very activist and important mentor for all of us. He was also there. And quite a lot of the others, actually. A former Attorney General from Jamaica, which is, trying to remember her name now, it's just gone off of my head. But we've had, all of those people came from Africa, from different parts of the Caribbean, and we settled in Hull. Hull was, in a sense, a kind of backwater. So many people, even though it was a port, a town, many people had not seen and engaged with black people. So it was quite common on the streets of Hull for people to follow us on the streets as black students and ask to see...
For 3 years?
Yes, ask to see our tails.
Is that so?
Yes, quite significant. And also it was very important because we, as a group, came together. We played steel band, we played cricket, but we enjoyed ourselves. We were being looked after by the British Council, and because we took things in our own stride. So we didn't join the university cricket team, but we were able to play cricket because we were loved the game. The university couldn't understand why we didn't want to join their team, because actually the first match we played against the university, we beat them. So, and you know, we were bowling with our normal shoes and no whites, anything like that. So it was that kind of ambient approach to it. But it was, for me, a very unpleasant experience. It also led to my radicalization in terms of my engagement, because it was around that time that we had the Vietnam War. It was around that time we had the
mid-late 60s.
That's right. In 1965 to 1968 was when I was at Hull. And we were engaged in a lot of activity. I was a member of the Radical Student Alliance at university, so I became involved in that. I also, in my own education, I was beginning to question my religion, question my belief, because around that time we were all, as students, dabbling with different ideas. Liberation theology in Catholicism, Pablo Freire, and the Latin American movement in the Catholic Church to get the Catholic Church to change. All of that was happening and is engaging me in my understanding, as well as what was happening in Paris in May. We and the Vietnam War. So at the university, we twinned with Hai Phong in Vietnam, raising money for ambulances. In Paris, the riots were happening in Paris. We were trying to get involved and do things. So the university was the grounding for my understanding. And at the end, during the time when we were out on holiday, we all went down to London. And we gravitated around the West Indian Student Centre in Earl's Court. That was the main student centre for overseas students, Caribbean students. It was paid for by all the Caribbean governments. It was in Earl's Court. And there you also continued our engagement and understanding. I was the chairman of the House Committee there, and also the vice chair of the Union of West Indian Students, which was an organization of West Indian students throughout the whole world.
Did you have an organization that you were working with then at the time?
At the time, directly from university, it was the Student Centre in London. Okay. That was the main focal point, because during every vacation time, people would go down there. And it was the point where all the radical elements happened. Caribbean Artist Movement, CAM, under the leadership of Andrew Solkey, John LaRose, and all others. They were there, Eddie Braithwaite. Everybody was there.
That's the late 60s then?
Yes. So you were mixing with people you really looked up to. You were able to see them in the flesh.
So therefore, that was like the first generation of our people then, or what would you say that was? I mean, they weren't on the Windrush, I know.
Yes,
yes. They were of that age. Then.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, there were generation would have come before us. My sister and others who came earlier, and I came in '65. So there were lots of people who were there before. But we were operating with a different milieu rather than within the community. We were operating as students. And therefore we were seen as foreign, as different from the people who settled, the community that settled in, even though there was a kind of relationship. And gradually we started to get involved with that community. And as a matter of fact, there was a tension between us as students and the other community, people within the community, because they saw us as people who benefited from the resources of the Caribbean, and therefore came over here in a way in which we were privileged.
But do you think that there was any element there of that generation before you that were involved in anything that you were doing? I was thinking of some of the Windrush, like from Sam King, that sort of generation, who would have been working with Claudia Jones and them. They would have been around sometime.
They would have been around, we would be looking up to them, Arthur. We would be aware of them and what was happening, but we also were very much limited in the areas of our influence around the student center, around supplementary education. And in some ways it replicated the bigger events that was happening with Claudia and other people like that. So there was that kind of feeling that we were students, and these were the real people. and therefore we were trying to be as helpful and engaged as possible, but really the activity was happening there. And that we gradually built for ourselves a mass of community people and organizations, and we tried to ensure that we did extend, we did link up with the community.
But just tell us before we just close this end, because I'm going to call you back for another session next week. But what were the challenges, though? I know that you were really involved. What was sort of challenges that faced you, and you faced?
Yeah, one of the key challenges was really putting flesh onto this concept of the Caribbean, because we weren't. We were Jamaicans, we were Trinidadians, we were Guyanese. And for example, for me, I had never ever met a Jamaican before I came to the United Kingdom. So we had to recognize politically, we had that understanding of unity and of the Caribbean Federation. But in actual words, in actual practice, we weren't. But that brought us together, and we had to learn to see what it is that united us, what it is that brought us together, how we could see ourselves as a united community. So that was a very important thing. The second thing, as I said, was trying to make sure that there were connections with the community, and also with a growing number of young people who were born here. We were students, we came from the Caribbean, we came and we settled as we in our tertiary education mode. We had also to bridge with the community, the Sam Kings and the Claudia Jones, and at the same time the young people who were born and growing up here and understanding. So I had set up a group called the Black Arts Workshop.
Well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to call you back next week, and you're going to talk about the Black Workshop. But Ansel, thank you for coming. Great story. And what we're going to do, we're going to get some details from you in the next session, and in which you'll tell us about other work you've been doing in the 70s and the 80s, you know, the GLC and that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Thank you this time, and we'll pass you on back to Lavina.